This is Robert Capuccio. Welcome to the Self-Help Antidote, a weekly dose of reason, perspective, and insight, where we challenge conventional thinking and explore authentic strategies and insights around personal transformation. Our commitment to you is to bring you some of the world's leading experts in the domains of fitness, wellness, coaching, and behavior change, separating fact from fallacy. Jeffrey Sanow. How you doing? Thank you very much for joining us on the Self-Help Antidote.
My pleasure.
So you've got a bit of a unique background. Former senior intelligence officer for the CIA. You are a presenter around the subject matter of strategic leadership, and you're an author. You have a book out now, if I'm correct on that.
Yes, sir.
And, I would imagine that you have training and experience and background that, most people, to be fair, don't have. And, this morning when I woke up and I was thinking about this interview, I thought about a conversation I had yesterday at work. And we were talking about operations and change management. And what became really apparent to us in that conversation was systems management, operations, change management. What we're really dealing with is people. I mean, if you walked into the office building and say, okay, show me the systems. It's not like an iPhone or a book. You would have to go through an explanation to sit down and talk to people. You can't do anything in the world without collaboration and connection. Just jumping right in there. In your diverse experience, what is the most important factors that create bridges between people and communication?
Let me refer back to my boss when I first came back from overseas. I'd been overseas as a standalone for roughly 17 years. And then I got that email that everybody dreads, which says, we want you to come be a manager. So I came back to the U.S., and one of the first things that my new boss told me was I had to figure out how to connect with each officer that was working for me individually. Because, let's face it, CIA operations officers tend to be type A, hard-charging, big ego maniacs, myself included.
Such a surprise.
Yeah, I know. But how do you successfully keep them between the guardrails? Because that's most of what you're doing. There may be times when you have to discipline one for this or be a little harder on one for that. Money's involved sometimes because we manage a pretty significant amount of U.S. government dollars. So sometimes those discussions can get harsh. But the overall management discussion, the guidance on how you do things, the guidance on how you talk to these people. The number one thing, like I said, my boss told me was you need to talk, you need to figure out how to connect with each one of your officers and talk to them so you can supervise them on an individual basis. Okay, well, I had 17 years experience overseas. I was a good officer. That's why I was put in that position. So let me just jump to the end and give you two examples of two officers that I guided. There was an ethnic Chinese lady deployed someplace in Asia. I honestly don't remember where. And she came back to see me like almost all officers. She was very productive, hardworking, good at what she did. And so she came back and she came into my office. And one of the things that my boss had also said to me was, in my writing, because that's how connection was, it was all via emails. There was very few personal interactions. You didn't pick up the phone and call them. It was all via email. So one of the things my boss had told me was at the beginning of each email, I also need to try and connect with that individual officer. And so I frequently started my emails out with something to the effect of, how's your wife? How's your kids? Are they enjoying school? Do they have a good Christmas holiday? Something to give the personal touch. So back to this Chinese lady who came to my office, and I remember it well. She came into my office and we talked a little bit, and then she says, I have to stop asking her the personal questions at the beginning of the email because she doesn't care. She knows I don't care. She knows that I know that she knows that I don't care. Nobody cares. I'm just wasting her time making her read it. Okay, I'm good with that. Now I don't have to write it. Less work for me to do because no matter what you think about government bureaucrats, CIA officers tend to be very busy writing a great deal. So great, a win for me. I don't have to do it anymore. This is part of my individual connection with each officer. And so everybody's happy. She left happy, everybody's happy. Example number two, ethnic Indian officer worked for me. He was also deployed in Asia. Very, very talented officer. Very good at his job, very good at writing. I looked forward to meeting him in person. So he came into my office and we're talking. And after about 10 minutes, I lean forward and I stick my finger in his face. And there's a verb called case officering. That means manipulating to get somebody to do what you want. That's what we do as case officers. We manipulate people to give us secrets. We give them money, but there's also other things involved. So that's the verb to case officer someone. So after about 10 minutes of this guy talking to me, I got my finger in his face and said, "You stop case officering me. And if you ever do it again, I will kill you." There were a few F-bombs dropped along the way, as I'm sure you can imagine. His jaw hit the floor. After about a long 10-second pregnant pause, he picked his jaw back up, sat up, and the conversation continued. And it continued well from that point forward. So the point to all that is you have to learn how to communicate individually with each subordinate. The ethnic Chinese lady, easy to communicate with. Didn't want any fluff, didn't want any noise, didn't want any background. She just wanted me to tell her what it is. Easy. The other gentleman, again, very talented young man, I needed to get him to realize he was not going to manipulate me into doing something. We're case officers. We're adults in the room. So we're going to treat each other that way. And I had to kind of smack him between the eyes with a 2x4 to get him to realize that. And I did. And it was successful. So the moral of all that is managers, leaders, supervisors, whatever noun you wish to use, need to learn how to speak to each individual. If we're speaking to a group, you have a CEO talking to the entire company. That's not what I'm talking about. But a CEO has a board or has his leadership team that's got maybe 10 or 15 people on it. He talks to them very differently than he talks to the whole gathering. So you have to learn how to talk to those people on an individual basis.
So me listening to this, there's a couple of things that I'm picking up. One is we talk a lot in management about things that I don't think we really examine. We've heard it so many times. So, well, a manager should be authentic. Well, what does even authenticity mean? Well, I'm going to be myself in every situation. Well, yeah, but that's an inward focus. You're not really focusing on the person in front of you and who they are as a unique, diverse individual. They're not you. They don't see the world necessarily the way you see the world. And they may not communicate the way you think communication should go. Not too long ago, I was interviewing somebody for a position, and she said something that was kind of unique. And a couple of people batted like well, I don't think batting their eyes is the right way to describe that. They kind of like clocked their head, but I loved it. And the question was pretty simple. Tell me about your first 3 months here. What are you going to do? Most people dive into mission statements and restructuring and all them. She said, well, I'm probably not going to do much my first 3 months because, and you know, most people don't want to hear that in an interview. I leaned in. I just want to know what's coming next. So I'm going to focus mostly on learning, asking questions, building relationships with people, getting to know who they are, and not really implementing much of anything. And I thought, I really like you as a candidate, because that slowing down is going to allow us to speed up and not make assumptions that derail us. this sounds like a really odd question, but how do you do that? What is the frame of mind? What are the skill sets to understand who someone else is, that they're different from you, and how to build that bridge?
So the first thing you need to do, and this is a skill that we work on a great deal as operations officers, because again, the ultimate objective is to steal secrets and recruit spies, for which that person could be executed. Okay, so it's serious business. So the first thing you have to understand is not what do I need, but what does that person need? I'm the supervisor. What does that person need? There's a new title that I heard in some recent discussions that I was having called servant leadership. I'm not here to lead, I'm here to serve. I'm here to serve the people that work for me. That's my role. So when you start with that mindset, then it becomes a question of what can I get this person to tell me? How hard is it going to be for this person to open up to me and say, this is what I really want to do? Because if you can get people to tell you what they really want to do and what rewards they really would like, then your job as a supervisor, as a leader, becomes easier, because then you can focus on that. We always like to reward people, but different people react to the reward differently. Is it a financial reward? Is it simply recognition? Is it a piece of paper? So we have to figure out what kind of reward do these people, each individual, again, it's on an individual basis, do they need or do they wish to keep moving forward, to feel like their efforts are appreciated? I'm sure in many industries, I know the one I was in, we work long hours. Just like law enforcement, we have pretty much the same divorce rate. It impacts our families and our lives. So what kind of a reward do I want if I'm being successful? It could be, give me 3 days off, give me a long weekend. And that's not an uncommon reward. I mean, if you go out and you do something really well, it's like, take the rest of the day off, take your family out to dinner, here's a credit card, whatever. So it's that individual recognition of the fact that that person did a good job. And so as a supervisor, as a leader, you need to figure out what buttons that individual officer needs pushed. At the example I already gave you, the Chinese lady, she does not want to be my friend. And I'm okay with that. We're not going to be friends with everybody that works for us. But she did want her marching orders. Okay, I can do that. So as a leader, as a supervisor, as a manager, you have to figure out what it is that each individual needs to be successful. Because that's my job. My job is not for me to be successful. My job is to make them successful.
I like the way you just said that. It's like, my job is not for me to be successful. It's to make them successful. Because if they're in the right position, they're a proper hire, the more successful they are, the more engaged, the more fulfilled, the better the organization is going to do if expectations are clearly set. As a leader, it's not about you. What I'm hearing, if I could take all of this and synthesize it, as a leader, you need empathy.
Very much so.
What do you not need? Like, what really gets in the way of doing this?
Offices, titles, big desks, things like that get in the way. One of the things I did, I took over a large office in Northern Virginia towards the end of my career, and I think I probably had 20 to 30 officers working for me. And at my first meeting, I had a staff meeting, I had everybody come in. It's like, okay, everybody move the chairs against the wall. Okay, now move this table against the other wall. Now bring the chairs into a circle. So we were all sitting at the same level. There was no head of the table, side of the table, under the table. We were all equals, because when it comes to ideas, yes, I have more experience, okay, but I'm not the only one that can have an idea. Why can't this brand new person just out of college or just graduated from the training program, why can't they have an excellent idea also? Well, they can, and they do. And so the trick is to create the environment that will allow them to feel comfortable saying, okay, this is my idea. It might sound crazy, but, and then you go down that path. And honestly, my experience is most of the time that first sentence of the idea doesn't survive, but the end sentence is a great program.
What do you mean by that? I just want to make sure that I
Sure.
understand.
So what I mean by that is, I got this idea. Okay, here's my idea. By the time it gets all chewed on and reviewed and everybody gets their perspective and optic on it, it doesn't look anything like the original idea, but it's much better and much more impactful because I've had this person's experience, that person's experience, that person's experience, all distilled into my initial idea.
That's another misunderstanding. When you take a look at culture, like what creates a high performing culture within any organization, doesn't matter what industry, what comes up time and time again are things like psychological safety, vulnerability, being really clear on the purpose, understanding why diversity outperforms homogeny. And a lot of times people misunderstand this as being a very soft type of culture. It's brutal. It's very hard. It's devastatingly difficult and a lot of conflict, not interpersonal, but ideological conflict in a high touch and high trust environment starts to emerge. And I think what it really is having that new person on the team who, let's be honest, inexperience is incredible. Because the more experience I have, the more depth of knowledge I have, but not necessarily more breadth. I tend to see things myopically through the lens of an expert. It's someone who has no idea, who's looking at this thing from a completely different vantage point that might have the right input. But even as you said, we need to tear that up in a room. And if there's not the safety, like you're talking about title, status, desks, because my ego is so big, there's not enough room in that room for anybody else to interject. We don't have the psychological safety for the vulnerability for ideas to come up or somebody to go, hey, I don't quite understand what you just said. Can I weigh in a little bit? So then it's not the best idea wins. It's the idea with the biggest title wins.
That's one of the things that the training you go through with the agency is extremely effective. Keep in mind, they've been doing the training since 1947, so they've been down this path a couple of times. And if you think they haven't seen big egos walk through that door, yeah, they have, and they know just how to deal with them. So what their training is extremely good at is it takes a guy or gal with a big ego. All right, I got this master's degree, or I have all this experience, or I'm a lawyer. Lawyers are the worst. So I'm really important, and I think I'm important, so I'm going to do this job. And the instructors at the farm are really, really good at beating the snot out of your ego. They beat the ego out of you because it has to be the right kind of ego. So they beat the one you bring out of you immediately, or starting immediately, and then they build it back up so that at the end, the type of ego you have is one that is suited to checking your ego at the door. Because when you're involved in the act of recruiting someone to give you government secrets, my ego has to absolutely be checked at the door. It's all about that person's ego. What does that person need to feel successful? What do they need to feel good? Do they need money? Do they need a girlfriend? Do they need medical care? Well, whatever the case may be, and the list is virtually endless. But it's my job to determine what that is and then meet those needs. Meeting someone else's needs is the very definition of checking your ego at the door.
And that makes total sense to me. And I know in my career where that happened. Where my first position in management, I was tragic. I mean, not just my first position. There's been other instances. But I remember one of the things my boss said to me at the time was, if you're the smartest person on your team, you're failing. You want to go out and hire people smarter than you. And then he added to that, given your innate level of intelligence, this is not that difficult for you to do. Well, thanks, boss. And it was one of those things that really made a difference. But the issue with ego is it creates blind spots. How do you know if you're in a leadership position and your ego is getting in the way of the performance of your people? What are some of the signs?
First thing you have to have, in order to answer that question or to address that issue, you have to have good open communication with your staff, whether your subordinates, your colleagues, or your supervisors. You have to have good communication. And your subordinate needs to be able to come into your office and say, yeah, this is really jacked up. I don't like this. I don't know why we're doing this. Please explain this to me again because I'm not really getting this. I don't see why we have that. So you have to be able to have the kind of conversation. You have to have me as a leader, as a supervisor. I have to be able to have my decisions questioned. And I have to be able to put up with that. Again, that becomes an ego issue. So when I was doing my job, when I was working, anybody could come into my office at any time and say, now, why are we doing that? And if I cannot adequately answer them, then that's my problem. So one of the things that my boss first told me when I came back from overseas, and I had about, I forget, 7 or 8 guys working for me, guys and gals working for me. He told me I needed to understand what each officer needed. I needed to figure out what each officer's buttons were, good and bad. And when I could do that, I would be able to provide them with the kind of support that they needed. Again, it goes back to leaders are not all about telling people what to do. That's not what a leader is supposed to be doing. A leader is supposed to be creating an environment in which the individuals can all contribute to the collective, and the collective can grow, prosper, whether it's profitability, operations, whatever the case may be. So that's not the environment that we were taught when I was in college many years ago. But that is the environment that has evolved. We've learned through painful experience that that's the kind of environment we need to create in order to be able to pull the creativity out of everybody. Each individual is different. And, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I was a perfect manager or that I got along with every employee. I got along with most of them. I was a good manager. I got promoted, et cetera, et cetera. But there was more than one occasion when I went down to someone's office and closed the door. I remember this very clearly. A young lady was on her way to Saudi Arabia. And so I went down to the office, her office, and closed the door. And she'd had some experiences previously that I referenced. And I said, you need to understand, you're going to Saudi Arabia. They don't put up with anything. You're a female. You have to dress and act according to their standards, no matter how morally offensive you might find it. I don't care how offensive you find it because they don't care how offensive you find it. But they will punish you if you do not act according to their cultural, social guidelines, and it will be very unpleasant for everybody involved. So for goodness sake, mind your manners. And she accepted it, and she did exactly what I asked her to do. She knew exactly what I was referring to when I was talking to her. So sometimes a leader has to be able to take that person and without having them feel like they've been taken to the woodshed, explain that this is the behavior that's expected, especially in dynamic environments. And let's face it, we're getting in our environment's becoming more and more dynamic every day. So we have to be able to support and guide our staffs and communicate with them on a one-to-one basis. That's probably the biggest satisfaction I have out of my time in the organization was I believe that I was able to connect with and communicate with almost everybody. I said almost, I wasn't perfect. I'm sure there's one or two that are listening going, oh, that guy, he was such a wanker. Anyway, so the whole idea is you have to learn how to communicate. It's on me to learn how to communicate with each employee or each staff member. It's not on each staff member to learn how to communicate with me. The burden's mine. I'm the leader.
So what I'm hearing is basically 3 things here in response to how do you know if your ego is bigger than it's big enough that it's getting in the way of performance. 1, are you creating an environment, not driving an environment, not dictating one, but facilitating an environment where there is a free-flowing, easy for me to say, range of ideas. There's creativity within your department. 2, if you're never being challenged on anything you're doing or saying and you have consensus, there's a problem. You need to pay attention. And do you have the level of relationship within that environment where you can have difficult conversations?
I would add one thing to that, although you kind of touched on it in your last part. If you never fail, you are not pushing yourself. That's kind of what the last statement you made was, sort of. If you're not failing at least once in a while, you're not really pushing yourself to develop your business or your activities, operations to the best degree possible. Because if we're always winning, then we're not trying hard enough. We got to lose. I had an officer come to me, and she said to me, that's when we were tracking the movement of weapons of mass destruction. She came to me and said, "Look, there's a shipment that came out of Asia. It's going to the Middle East. I'm trying to track it. I don't think I'm going to be able to, so I'm not sure what to do." My response to her, and she was a very good analyst, very good. My response to her was, "We swing at every pitch. So you write whatever emails you need to write to get out the door, and you get them out the door today. If you need help, because the process, it goes through a process for emails, cable traffic to be released from the building. I said, if you need help getting anything out, you come see me. I will go unplug whatever the blockage is. But we need to get that done now." And she went, "Okay." And she did that. And then when I came in the next morning, she came to my office and said, "Yeah, we got it. We intercepted it, and we turned it around, and we sent it back." I gave her a performance award for that. So, you reward success. You encourage risk-taking. I'm not talking, tightrope walking here. I'm talking responsible risk-taking where the possibility of failure exists. Because if you avoid failure, you're never, ever really going to grow as a business or as an operations or even as a person. You don't trip once in a while, you're not running fast enough. Now, if you're always tripping, that's a different story entirely. But you got to be pushing yourself, your teams, clearing the path for them in order to be successful.
I think from a coaching perspective, as an executive coach, someone's had individual clients, group clients, people underestimate that, how valuable failure is. Like having a structure, having a system, having something not work out and being able to evaluate and modify probably enables you to move further faster than you would have been without that. Now it hurts. That's another, I understand how it connects to ego. What is your tolerance for failure? Calculated failure. I mean, in your former job, the stakes are very, very high for failure. If I fail, I ruin a presentation. There's a few hundred people that are wishing they can get an hour of their life back, or the board is upset with me because I just went off on one. It's like, oh my God, he's just doing this again. Not saying that's ever happened. It's just purely hypothetical. But in your former position, wow, failure could be catastrophic, but it's those small learnings along the way that hopefully help you divert from that.
Well, and we've learned with experience. The agency was created, I think, in 1947, coming out of World War II. We've learned a couple of things. One is every operational proposal goes before a committee. Now, there's two reasons for that. One is you get better ideas. Mm-hmm. Two is not one person can be blamed if it fails. So that's somewhat of a self-protection activity, but it also makes sense in that you want to have a half a dozen operations officers or sitting around the table going, okay, we have this proposal for this operation. What do you think? Is it good, bad, indifferent? And you get the input from experienced people. They're going to say, yeah, this is a good idea, but do this instead, or no, that's a horrible idea, don't do it. Again, just depending on the nature of the discussion, but that kind of feedback is invaluable, and we protect ourselves by doing it in a somewhat of a group setting, so that you have good ideas. And that's an area, as we touched on the ego, no one's ego gets harmed that way because the panel met and said, all these experienced officers said, this is not going to fly. Here's why, or make this change or adjust it this way.
I don't think there's too many of them in our audience right now, but I almost hear the voice of someone. But what about accountability? I think accountability speaks to ownership. Like, what happened? It doesn't matter who did it. What am I going to do? I need to take action on this. I need to bring about an outcome or a solution. Blame's a waste of time because then it gets into defense rather than, okay, what exactly happened? How did it happen? What did we learn from it? And what do we do now? So I really like that approach as well. I normally do not bring things up like this, but it's a question that's been in the back of my mind for a little while now, so I want to bring it up. I am not a political person. As a matter of fact, I'm a weirdo. I'm a complete moderate. I think there are great ideas on the left and the right, and there are some really bad ideas on the left and the right. And fighting and arguing ideologically, not interpersonally, kind of lands you in the middle where hopefully the better, not the best solutions lie. But as I'm listening to this conversation, it's like, how as a leader can you possibly do your job in a department, not to mention an organization, when the stakes are high, not life and death, but let's be honest, the stakes are high for a lot of folks.
Absolutely.
Without appreciating, understanding, and embracing diversity. Like, how does that work? What's the role of understanding the diversity of your people, what makes them different, and how to align and direct that towards an outcome?
The secret to that is knowing what the desired outcome is. And the organization was very good at recognizing what players should be brought in for what conversations. What am I talking about? You can have someone like me. You want to recruit me. Okay, what am I? I'm a middle-aged white guy from Ohio. I grew up on a small farm. So what is going to appeal to me? Chances are, not necessarily exclusively, but and again, we play an odds game. Odds are that someone that's kind of like me, grew up on a farm. It's called the commonalities approach. What are the common areas? What areas do we have in common? And that's how we can develop a relationship, which will lead to the outcome that we want, which in my case was someone's committing espionage. So the same rules apply to any gender. The trick is you have to know what the desired outcome is. And keep in mind, my business was very personal. It's very individual. So I need to know, what does this individual need in order to feel like I'm his new best friend? How do I act? How is he or she going to respond? And we need to be able to plug into that. And so I was able to do that on more than one occasion where I could reach out to him. Let me give you an example. I was recruiting somebody in the Middle East. He was married. He had 3 daughters. I was married. I had 2 daughters. And so as you move the relationship along, it becomes more and more personal when you're trying to get someone to commit treason. So it gets very personal. And then the decision was made and approved for my family to come with me to this country to tour it a little bit. And it worked great. And so all of a sudden you had a personal connection. All of a sudden, even though his daughters didn't speak English, my daughter didn't speak Arabic, my wife didn't speak Arabic, and his wife didn't speak English, somehow they managed to communicate as only women and children can. So it turned out to be a very fundamentally binding activity. Even though there were some frustrations, nonetheless, there were some experiences that came out of that laid the foundation for a good future relationship as far as my work was concerned. I'll give you one example that happened on that trip, and it is one we laugh about to this day. We'd already been driving around looking at the sites. We stopped, we're having lunch, And my oldest daughter reaches in front of my younger daughter and grabs a piece of sausage to bring back to her plate. As she's passing over my youngest daughter's glass of Pepsi, the sausage falls off and goes right into the Pepsi. And what are you going to do? You can all laugh or you can get upset. We chose to laugh. So it's just one of those things that we still remember to this day, because my youngest daughter, her initial reaction, of course, would be to be angry, but we're all looking at it. And I'm sure you can imagine what a piece of sausage floating in a jar, in a glass full of Pepsi looks like. So again, you have to keep your sense of humor. You have to take things like that. And that helps with the relationship.
Commonality.
Yeah. Commonality is very important.
Throughout this whole conversation, I've been thinking about Tom Peters, the business consultant. Back in the 1990s, I first started when I was a relatively young man. I started listening to Tom, and I found him so engaging. You know, one of the things that he talked about in one of his live seminars were, and he was being a little bit facetious, in this organization, you know, we reward great failures and punish mediocre successes. I thought, wow, I got what he was trying to say. I don't think he meant that literally, but it was a very, very good point. Another thing he talked about was, if you've got 10 people in an organization that all seem to agree with each other, 9 of them are probably redundant. And what he was talking about with diversity, it wasn't about ethnicity. It was about, yes, people are going to have different ethnic backgrounds. They're going to grow up in different parts of the world. One person grows up in town, the other one in the country. What that does is it shapes their filters and lenses in a way that adds valuable, creative contribution. Because if you're not innovating, you're not distinct. And that means you're not going to be in existence very much longer as an organization. So when he was talking about diversity, he was talking about how it actually works to fulfill an agreed upon and clearly stated purpose. I remember when I was working overseas, one of the things that we did, besides talk about our purpose and our outcomes constantly, to where you could have woken any one of us up in the middle of the night and doused us with ice water and asked us what our purpose was, we'd be able to come back and tell you. We spent a lot of time after hours just hanging out. And because we were passionate about the job, work was always central, but it wasn't about that. It was about getting to know each other on a human level. So if I couldn't make it somewhere and somebody else on my team rocked up, we had our individuality, but we also had a hive mind. We knew what one another would think and do in a situation. And that added so much, because when unforeseen challenges came up, that team stepped up and sacrificed in a way that's just, it's just beautiful, is the word that pops into my mind. What is it as, this sounds like a really big question, because I feel, and this could just be my biases as an older guy, there's a leadership vacuum emerging in our society. What do we need to learn as individuals and collectively if we're going to produce better leaders and become better leaders ourselves in the future?
Yeah, that's not a small question.
No, it's not. I was hesitant to ask it. It seems unfair.
Right. No, it's not. It's nothing about being fair. What we need to, in my opinion, everything comes back down to the individual. So what do I need to learn? I need to learn how to listen. That's probably one of the biggest skills that we are not taught. You're not going to go to college and take a listening class. You'll go to college and take a speaking class, but not a listening class. Listening is not a skill that we're very good at. The only time it's ever emphasized for most of us is when our mother gets down in our face and says, "You listen to me, young man." That's about the only time listening is taught. So we have to be better listeners, and we have to know how to listen, and we need to know what to listen for. Because lots of times what you're hearing is not what you're being told. So you have to learn how to listen to the message that may not be straightforward because the employee or your wife or your girlfriend or your child don't want to come out and say exactly what the issue is. So you as the listener have to understand what they're really saying. What is their motivation? What are they trying to get to? And so I would say the first part of the answer to your question is we have to learn how to listen on an individual basis. The next part of the question is we have to learn how to talk on an individual basis as well. So you could talk to me about certain things. Like I said, I grew up on a small farm in Ohio, so that's going to be my frame of reference. I do some work out in California, so I can assure you that someone that grew up in Hollywood versus someone that grew up on a small farm in Ohio, we have very different optics. That doesn't mean I'm right or they're right or wrong. It's got nothing to do with right or wrong. It's got to do with perspectives. And you'll always get a better product when you can have multiple perspectives come together and say, well, what about this? Did you ever think about that? And so that's where, again, I have to be able to say, you know what? Your idea is better than mine. You win this round. I'll let my ego to the side and admit you got a great idea. Let's do it your way. How hard is it for people to say, you know what? You're right. Let's do it your way. How often do people say, we're doing it my way? Again, that sends the wrong message. Did that answer your question?
Beautifully.
Oh,
Because,
okay, good.
I mean, if you think about it, like living here in Southern California, traffic is a problem, and you can leave your house at an ungodly hour and think, I've really gotten ahead of all of it, haven't I? And at 4:30 in the morning, you could be like on the 5, heaven forbid the 405, and all of a sudden, they got a bright idea to close 4 out of 5 lanes. And it almost creates that bottleneck. It doesn't matter how fast you're driving or how open traffic is. Your ability to get from where you started to where you want to go in the time frame that you anticipated depends on how you get through that bottleneck. And to me, when you say listening, that's that bottleneck. Because if we can really listen to each other, we have input, we have creativity. That requires empathy. It requires understanding. You're not going to immersively listen, especially in the nuances like what you said. What's being said is not necessarily the intention of what's being communicated for an array of reasons. I think that's a different podcast. But you're going to learn about people, yourselves, the situation you're talking about. I think it's that rate limiting step. Without listening, none of these other things are possible. Would you mind talking a little bit before we wrap this great conversation about your book?
Oh, would I mind talking about my book? No, I wouldn't mind talking about my book at all. Let's even get it. There we go. Humint for Humanity. Humint stands for human intelligence. That's the kind of intelligence that I collected. You have SIGINT, which is signals intelligence. That's what NSA vacuums up out of the space. Humint is human intelligence. That's where I go talk to somebody and I'm collecting intelligence on what that government or that person or that organization is doing. So the title is Humint for Humanity. I try and one of the things I learned, excuse me, was that most Americans stop at this big blue border we have on each side of our country. You live on that big blue border over there. You have a little bit of input from the South, but not a lot. And Canada doesn't count. So how do we see beyond those two big blue borders? And what I've tried to do is take people to the many countries that I've visited and give them the 5-foot elevation view and explain to them what this country is like. Because they see the 2.5 minute news segment on CNN or Fox News, whichever you prefer to listen to. And it doesn't really do justice, or they see it in Hollywood, a Hollywoodized version of it. Okay, that's not really the same thing. So what I've done is I've taken many of the countries that I've been to, and I've tried to describe them, how it looked for either me or my wife or my kids or what have you. And actually, one of the chapters was written by my daughter. I wanted her opinion on what it was like to live in all the different places that we lived in. But I talk about some individual countries. Oman. Oman is a fascinating country. I'm going to bet you read Sinbad the Sailor when you were a young man, didn't you?
I did not.
Oh, shame on you. Go read it. Anyway, Sinbad the Sailor sailed from Oman. They have a mock-up of his boat on one of the traffic circles. Oman has been a port city, so you have lots of foreign influences. I mean, the currency was the Indian rupee for decades and decades and decades because that was just easier. So that's just one of the countries that I look at. I can't say enough good about Oman. I loved every time we went there. And then I also talk about perhaps the opposite end of the spectrum, Lebanon. Lebanon and Beirut at one time was considered the pearl of the Mediterranean. Beirut had North African Arab influence. It was a former French colony, so it had the French influence. It has the Turkish influence. It has the Iranian influence. It was a port city, so you get the foreign influence. When you start to bring all those influences together, you get a vibrant, active culture. You get vibrant, active people. You get lots of mixed DNA. The Crusaders were nice enough to deposit blue-eyed DNA, so my blue eyes didn't stick out too badly when I was there. But it was a wonderful place. They had French, they had food. It was great up until about 1985 when all the civil wars started. So in my book, I compare Beirut and Lebanon to Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston, as you may recall, when she first hit the scene, wow, was she gorgeous? Could she sing? Oh my goodness, she was fabulous. Much like Beirut and Lebanon, a fabulous place, fabulous cuisine, fabulous people, the most beautiful women in the Middle East. Everybody generally agrees with that, and if they don't, they're wrong. And then again, as with Whitney Houston, you have a very, very unfortunate ending. Things did not end well for Whitney Houston, and that I think makes everybody sad because she did have such talent. It's the same thing in what we're seeing right now in Lebanon and in Beirut. You have a fantastic culture, country, food, ethnicity, freedoms, all kinds of things kind of being ground up in a meat grinder because of everything that's going on in the Middle East with the terrorism or whatever you want to call it. I don't want to get into that particular discussion. And it's tough. So my book addresses the spectrum of those countries. It talks a little bit about some of the experiences that my now ex-wife had. Just a quick example. She got the little green postcard that said, "You have a package at the post office," while we were living in New Delhi. Her parents very nicely sent us a little box of Christmas presents. Okay, great. Very nice of them. So my wife takes the little card and her passport, and the driver takes her down to the post office, and she goes up and shows the card and her passport. And the guy working the desk takes one look at the card and one look at the passport and says, "That's not your name." They had addressed the package to our youngest daughter, who at the time would have been 14 months old. And they're like, "I can't give it to you because passport doesn't match the name on the card." So my wife's like, oh. She has to go back home, get my 14-month-old daughter, get her passport. And you know how 14-month-olds like to be held and, confined. And so they're standing in line. They don't really wait in lines in India. They tend to wait in crowds. My wife refused to do that, so she tended to wait behind the crowd until somebody took sympathy on her and called her up. While she's holding this 14-month-old child who's kicking and not wanting to be there, gets up to the desk, shows, okay, here's my child, here's the passport, here's the card, this is this person. Okay. They bring the package out, and, after going through all that, they give it to her. She takes it home. She opens it up. The package is empty. They had stolen everything out of it except one piece of wrapping paper. How do you deal with that? I give my ex-wife, my book is dedicated to my ex-wife. Lots of folks think I lost my mind, but none of what I did would have been possible without my ex-wife being willing and able to put up with nonsense like that and not just come and shoot me and say, I'm out of here, let's go. I'm taking the kids and going back to wherever. So that's what the book's about. It's trying to give people a sense and a feel at the 5-foot elevation level for the countries that I've been in.
Like, how do we understand and effectively communicate with one another? I mean, my advice is anybody who thinks they know anything, travel. And I mean, really travel. Get a passport and travel, because if everyone around you thinks the same, you all agree on everything. Consensus doesn't mean you're right. It most likely means you are in an echo chamber. You're living a confirmation bias. You don't know anything until you get around people that think very differently and have the openness and the humility to go, okay, why in this context is this correct as well? Not meaning better than, more correct than, but valid as well, within reason. I mean, some people like believe some crazy stuff, but that's not most people. I think that just from your description of the book makes me think, wow, what a valuable read. And given the source of the content, definitely worth picking up and having a read. Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for the time you've given us today. Great talking to you.
Absolutely. Likewise. My pleasure.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Visit us at theselfhelpantidote.com to share your feedback, insights, and recommendations on what topics you'd like us to explore in the future.